Hello everyone, it's Bella and welcome back to my channel. And today I'm going to be showing you all of my June reads. So I read a good amount of books in June. I read 10 books and I enjoyed most of them. So let's get on to the books. The first book that I read this month was The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. If you didn't know, this is the first book in the Chronicles of Narnia, which is a fantasy series. I watched the movies a lot as a kid and I absolutely love them. They bring so much nostalgia for me, so I wanted to give the books a shot and read them all. And I only read the first book when I was younger and I barely remembered it, so I wanted to reread it and see what I thought. Unfortunately, I gave it 3 stars. The reason why was because there were some sexist comments that put me off a little bit, and it was written in 1950, so I understand that it wasn't the same standards as modern time, but it still put me off, especially because the movie didn't have those. And also, I thought the action in the movie was much better. I thought that the battle scenes were really cool in the movie, but in the books, they kind of fell flat or weren't there at all. So that's just my thoughts. I think that if you are a fan of the movies, then you should definitely give it a chance and see if you like it, but I didn't end up enjoying it as much as the movies. I'm still going to continue reading the series, but I don't know if I'm going to enjoy it more or if it's going to fall flat again like this book did. My reads got much better with my next book, which is The Priory of the Orange Tree. Now, I have wanted to read The Priory of the Orange Tree for a really long time. I heard really good things about it, and because June is Pride Month, I wanted to read The Priory of the Orange Tree in June. I gave this book a 4.5 out of 5 stars. This is a high fantasy book with rich lore and dragons and politics and sapphics. So since there was a sapphic relationship, that was why I decided to read it this month. The writing was beautiful and the main characters were so real and interesting. They had good and bad sides to them, and it made it so much more real instead of just being the stereotypical heroes or villains of the story. I loved the romance and the diversity, and of course, the dragons. I am a huge fan of dragons. They're my favorite mythological— wow. I could not say that. They're my favorite mythological creature. And so that was one of the reasons why I was so excited to read this book, and the dragons in this book did not disappoint. They were beautifully written, and I just really enjoyed the lore behind them. The reason why I took off half a star was because it did take me a while to get into this book. It honestly took a couple hundred pages for it to start to pick up, and there was a lot of world building and politics right within the first 50 pages, and you know, I don't have a problem with that. It just does make it a little hard to keep up with and get into when you're starting a book like this. I do want to reread it at some point because this is adult fantasy instead of YA fantasy. It is a little different than what I usually read because, as you can tell, actually that's adult, never mind. I read a lot of YA fantasy instead of adult fantasy, so that's probably one of the reasons why it took me a little bit to get into, because it is so different than my normal reads. So if you enjoy fantasy or just want more diverse books to get into, then I definitely recommend Priory of the Orange Tree. So the third book that I read this month was Attack on Titan, the manga. This was one of the first mangas that I've ever read, and I did really enjoy it. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. It was very interesting and a little bit creepy, which satisfied the side of me that loves reading horror. I don't really have much to say about it besides the fact that I want to continue with the rest of the volumes, which I am probably going to get soon. So definitely check it out if you like manga. The next book I read is The Lost Book of the White. This is a Shadowhunter book. It is the second book in the Eldest Curses series. It's the sequel to the Red Scrolls of Magic, and it follows Magnus and Alec in another adventure sometime before the Dark Artifices, which is her last Shadowhunter series chronologically. I gave it 4 stars. The reason why was because I read this book sometime last November when it first came out, and I think that impacted my reread because I didn't enjoy it as much as the reread that I did of the other Shadowhunter books. Since I did read this more recently than the other ones, I think it impacted my experience. But just in general, I like this book a little bit less than the Red Scrolls of Magic. I was a little bored at some points, and I just found myself wishing sometimes that it would move along a little faster, but I did love a lot of things about it, including the characters, and the plot was fairly good. It's decent, but it's not my favorite Shadowhunter book. There's not much else I can say without spoiling the Shadowhunter books, but if you do like Shadowhunters and you haven't read this book, you should definitely check it out. It is worth the read. The 5th book that I read this month is They Both Die at the End. Now, I read this book for Pride because it has LGBT characters in it. It is about 2 boys coming together on their last day alive to make the most of it. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. I loved this book. It had so many good messages and made me really think about life and how we live it. I also loved the characters, and there was a lot of really good quotes in this book. This book will break your heart, but it is definitely worth it. I recommend it. Next up, we have a book that I'm really excited about. It is one of my favorite books of all time, and that is Red, White, and Royal Blue. So I first read this book around December last year, and I absolutely loved it. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. I blew through it all in one day. And then this year, I thought that I'd reread it, except in the audiobook form, because I wanted to read another book for Pride Month. I did that, and I loved it even more the second time. This book made me laugh and cry and just feel so many things. Obviously, I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. It's my favorite romance book of all time and one of my favorite books of all time, which is giving it a very high praise considering I don't like to say favorite books because I have a very hard time choosing what are my favorite books, but this is definitely one of them. Red, White, and Royal Blue is a sort of enemies to lovers between the Prince of England and the son of the President of the United States. The reason I say sort of enemies to lovers is because I feel like a lot of people who like enemies to lovers, like the really hardcore, like they straight up hate each other enemies to lovers. This isn't like that. They both kind of have some other feelings besides hatred for each other right off the bat. But the biorepresentation in this book is amazing. I loved it so much. And I also love how each character grows individually, not just with each other. There is not a dull moment in this book, and it just leaves you with an incredibly hopeful feeling, and I just want to reread it over and over again. So please check this book out if you have not already. Next up are the Heartstopper graphic novels. I loved these so much. They're so adorable, and I got addicted to them as soon as I started reading. They are a love story between 2 boys in high school, and it talks about other things. The second 2 books get into some darker topics, but I thought they handled really well. I gave all 3 of the graphic novels 5 out of 5 stars. Overall, I just felt really represented by these books, and I loved them so much. I really recommend them if you haven't already read them. Alright, my final book is Lady Midnight. This is another one of my favorite books. It is the first book in the Dark Artifices trilogy, which is a Shadowhunters series. In my opinion, this is Cassandra Clare's best written series. The writing is incredible. It has some of my favorite characters and moments of all time. And generally, this series just has a really special place in my heart. This is a reread. I read all of the Shadowhunter books for the first time last year, and I've been rereading them all of this year. So I'm coming to a close with my rereading the Shadowhunter books with the Dark Artifices trilogy. I'm actually vlogging me rereading this trilogy, so that'll be up on my channel soon. Of course, I gave this book 5 out of 5 stars. Again, the plot, the characters, everything is really incredible. If you're a fan of Shadowhunters and you read the other books and you haven't read this series, then you definitely need to. I will say that again, please read this series. If you haven't read any Shadowhunter books, then I will always recommend them. Even though they can seem pretty daunting since there is a lot of them, in my opinion, it's very worth it. Alright guys, those were all my June reads. I want to know, how many books did you guys read? What was your favorite book of the month? I think my favorite book was either Lady Midnight or Red, White, and Royal Blue. I hope you all enjoyed the video. Let me know your thoughts on the books that I read, and make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on those post notifications. Bye!